Billionaire mother visits her son's grave. Finds a black waitress crying with a child and is left shocked. It was just another visit to her son's grave, something she had done countless times before. The weather was unforgiving, rain falling in sheets as the wind whispered through the rows of graves. But that day everything felt different. As she stood there, her eyes fixed on the cold stone marking where Adrian lay, she heard it. A soft sobbing. At first, she thought it was the wind, but then it came again, more distinct. She turned, her heart thumping wildly. In front of her, there was a woman, a young black waitress, clutching a child, both of them in tears. The sight alone struck her like a bolt of lightning, but what truly stopped her was the child's face. He looked so familiar, so strikingly like Adrian. Could it be? She hadn't seen that look in years, and yet here it was, standing before her, in the middle of a storm, with a woman she did not know. What was going on? Was this some kind of cruel joke, or was there something far deeper beneath the surface that she was yet to uncover? And why had this woman come here, to this grave of all places? Who was she? This woman standing in front of the grave of someone she had no connection to, someone she had never met, a stranger, a woman who appeared at this very spot at the most unexpected time, holding a child in her arms. The rain poured relentlessly, as if nature itself was witnessing the tension in the air. Was this a chance encounter? Or was there something more behind it? Victoria, the billionaire who had lost everything when she buried her only son, stood frozen, her mind racing with confusion. She'd been coming to this grave for years, a private ritual, a way to mourn her son, Adrian. So why was this woman here, crying over a child who looked too much like Adrian? And why did the sight of this woman shake her to the core, like an unresolved chapter of her own life had come back to haunt her? Was the child's resemblance simply a cruel coincidence? Or was there something she had missed? Some hidden truth that would unravel her entire understanding of what happened to her son? Who was this woman really? And why had she come here today? Was she part of a story Victoria had never been told? Was the grave not just a place of mourning, but a key to unlocking a mystery Victoria had never even imagined? Who is the woman, and what secret is buried beneath this gravestone? Stay tuned as we dig deeper into this shocking encounter, a tale that will leave you questioning everything. Victoria Blackwood had it all. She was the kind of woman who seemed untouchable, a billionaire with power, wealth, and influence. Her name was synonymous with success. Yet beneath the polished exterior, a deep, insufferable pain gnawed at her heart. The kind of pain that only a mother could know. Adrian, her only son, had been her world. She had raised him with love, sheltering him from the harshness of the world, guiding him with the wisdom of a woman who knew the value of every precious moment. But all of that was shattered in an instant. Adrian was gone. It was the kind of loss that doesn't make sense, a grief so raw it felt like a gaping wound in her chest. The world moved on, but for Victoria, time stood still. For years, she sought solace in the graveyard, the cold stones marking Adrian's final resting place, the only comfort she could find. Every visit was a ritual. Every trip to that cemetery was a painful reminder of what she had lost. As she walked through the rows of graves, she could feel her son's presence there, his spirit forever tied to the earth. It was where she could mourn him in peace, away from the public's eyes and the expectations that came with her wealth and status. But as much as she longed for closure, the pain never seemed to ease. On that fateful day, as the rain poured heavily on her, Victoria couldn't have known that this trip would be unlike any other. It was not the familiar solitude she had come to expect, but rather an encounter that would send shockwaves through her carefully constructed world. Meanwhile, a woman, seemingly from another world, stood at the edge of the cemetery. She wasn't a woman of wealth or power. She was a humble waitress, struggling to make ends meet, carrying the weight of her own burdens. Her life had never been easy, filled with long hours and little reward. But she had her own dreams, her own aspirations, just like anyone else. And today she had come to this graveyard, though she had never been there before. The woman's eyes were red from crying, her heart heavy with something she could hardly understand herself. As the woman clutched the child in her arms, she stared down at the grave before her, a deep sorrow in her gaze. It was a sorrow that mirrored Victoria's in many ways, but there was a tension in the air. Something was different, something was off. This wasn't just another random stranger at the cemetery. No, this woman had come here with a purpose, and as the two women's eyes met, something inside Victoria snapped. There was something about her, something unsettling, yet familiar, something that tied them together in a way that Victoria couldn't explain. Victoria's mind raced. How could she have missed it all these years? The child, no more than 3 or 4 years old, looked so much like Adrian, like a reflection from the past. Was it just a coincidence? Or was there more to this woman's presence here than met the eye? What did the child have to do with her son? Could this woman have known Adrian in ways Victoria never imagined? Or was she just another stranger? But then, as the woman began to speak, the words that left her lips would set off a chain of events that would turn Victoria's world upside down, revealing secrets she never expected, and forcing her to confront a past she had buried deep inside. Victoria's heart hammered in her chest as she stood frozen, her eyes locked on the scene before her. She hadn't expected to see anyone, let alone this woman. This woman, who had once served her at the cafe just a few months ago, was now standing at her son's grave, a quiet sorrow in her eyes, tears staining her cheeks. The woman was clutching a child, the small figure buried against her chest, hidden under the shelter of the woman's trembling arms. But what caught Victoria off guard, what made her stomach twist in disbelief, was the resemblance. The child, he looked just like Adrian. No, it couldn't be. It was impossible. She had seen him only in her memories, those fleeting, painful images of her boy that she carried with her everywhere. And yet, here was this child, so young, so full of innocence, yet bearing an unmistakable resemblance to Adrian, down to the curve of his jaw, the way his eyes shimmered with a haunting familiarity. Victoria's mind raced. She had to be imagining things. But then the woman, her face streaked with tears, looked up slowly, her gaze meeting Victoria's, as though she had been expecting this encounter all along. Slowly, she lowered the child from her arms, and the child's wide, innocent eyes met Victoria's gaze. And that was when the full weight of the moment struck. The world seemed to slow down, as if time had come to a halt. This was not some simple, accidental meeting. No. This child, the very one Victoria had never expected to see, was standing right before her, in front of Adrian's grave. And as the woman lifted the child's face, it was undeniable. Victoria's breath caught in her throat as she struggled to form words. Her heart raced in her chest, pounding as though it was trying to escape. This child was the image of Adrian, yet so much younger, and yet there was no mistaking it. His features were too similar, his eyes too familiar. The memories came rushing back in a wave. Adrian laughing, Adrian holding her hand, Adrian's playful smile. This child was a living reminder of what she had lost, and yet something wasn't adding up. How could it be? How could this woman, this stranger, have a child that looked like her son? Victoria's body trembled with uncertainty, her voice barely a whisper. She wanted to reach out, to ask questions, but the words stuck in her throat. The grief she had buried for so long surged to the surface, overwhelming her as her emotions fought for control. Her world had just shifted, and she couldn't quite wrap her mind around what was happening. The woman, still holding the child close, seemed to sense Victoria's shock. Her eyes softened with empathy, yet there was an underlying tension in her expression, as if she had been holding something back, something that Victoria was not yet ready to understand. "You don't remember me, do you?" The words left her lips quietly, but they hit Victoria like a ton of bricks. Victoria blinked, confused. What did she mean by that? She could barely remember anything beyond the shock of the moment. "I was the waitress at the cafe you frequented, the one you always sat with him," the woman continued, her voice shaky as she glanced down at the child in her arms. "I've always known who you were, but you never noticed me, until now. It's time you knew the truth." Victoria stood there, paralyzed, as the weight of the woman's words sank in. Her son, Adrian, had been a regular at that cafe, always stopping by for coffee on his way to work. But how could this woman, this waitress, know more than that? And what was she hiding? What was the truth she was talking about? Why had she come here, to this grave, at this very moment? The unsettling feeling crept over Victoria again. She could feel the pieces of a puzzle clicking into place, but she didn't know what the final picture looked like. The woman's face hardened and she shifted uncomfortably, her gaze dropping to the ground for a moment before looking back up at Victoria. I knew your son better than you think. And so did he know me. The words echoed in Victoria's mind, but they made no sense. Her pulse quickened. What did this woman mean? How could she have known Adrian better than she did? And what was she hiding? The questions swirled around in her mind, each one more confusing than the last. But then, just as Victoria was about to speak, the woman whispered something that would change everything. Adrian. He's not gone, Victoria. He's alive. Victoria's world tilted on its axis. Her son, alive? Impossible. She had seen the evidence, the autopsy report, the funeral, the grief that had consumed her. How could this be true? And who was this woman to say such things? The revelation, however impossible it seemed, sent a chill down Victoria's spine. What was this woman trying to tell her? How was she involved in this shocking turn of events? What secret had she been hiding for all these years? And most importantly, where was Adrian? Victoria's mind spun with questions, each one sharper than the last. And just like that, the story she thought she knew, the story of loss and grief, was thrown into chaos. The truth was out there, hidden somewhere in the words of this stranger, and it was waiting to be uncovered. But Victoria wasn't sure if she was ready to face it. Victoria's mind was reeling. The words echoed in her head like a deafening drum. Adrian. He's alive. It didn't make sense, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that there was some kind of truth buried beneath the woman's cryptic statements. For days, Victoria couldn't focus. The graveyard visit, the child's uncanny resemblance to her son, the waitress who seemed to know more than she was willing to reveal. It all left her in a state of disbelief. Could it be possible? Was Adrian really alive? How could she have been wrong all these years? The unanswered questions gnawed at her, leaving a hole in her chest that even time couldn't fill. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Victoria reached out to the woman, arranging a meeting. The waitress, whose name was Vanessa, was hesitant but agreed to speak. She had waited for this moment for a long time, and now it seemed the time had come. They met in a small, dimly lit cafe, away from prying eyes, where no one could overhear their conversation. Vanessa, sitting across from Victoria, looked tired, as if carrying the weight of 1,000 untold secrets. Her hands fidgeted nervously, and her eyes darted around the room as though expecting someone to overhear their conversation. I knew you'd find me, Vanessa said softly, her voice trembling. I didn't want to, but I had no choice. Victoria leaned forward, her heart pounding in her chest. What do you mean? You said Adrian was alive. Tell me everything. Vanessa took a deep breath, clearly struggling with the gravity of what she was about to say. Adrian, he didn't die. At least, not in the way you think. She paused, as though unsure of how much to reveal. I knew Adrian for a long time before he disappeared. We had a relationship, a secret one. No one knew about it, not even you. Victoria's eyes widened. This was not the news she had expected. You were with him? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The shock was overwhelming, and she could hardly process what Vanessa was saying. Vanessa nodded slowly, her face filled with sorrow. Yes, he was my secret, and I was his. But we had our reasons. We never meant to hurt you, Victoria. You had to believe that he was gone. But why? Victoria asked, her voice cracking with emotion. Why would he fake his death? Why would he leave me to suffer like this? Vanessa hesitated before answering. There were forces at play, things that neither of us could control. Adrian was in danger, Victoria. There were people after him, people who would have killed him if they knew the truth. So, we made a plan, a drastic plan. He had to disappear. Victoria could hardly breathe, the weight of Vanessa's words pressing down on her like a heavy stone. Her son, whom she had mourned for so long, had not been taken by fate or illness. No, he had been hidden away, kept from her by a web of lies, deceit, and most terrifying of all, danger. She couldn't wrap her head around it. Adrian was alive. But where was he now? Why hadn't he come back? Why had he left her in the dark all this time? Vanessa continued, her voice barely audible. Adrian had no choice. His life was in danger, and when you saw him last, when you said goodbye, it was the last time you'd ever see him. The real him. He had to leave for his own safety, and yours. Victoria's world was spinning. The grief she had carried for years was suddenly turned on its head. What she had believed to be the tragic end of her son's life was now shrouded in mystery. Had Adrian truly been alive this whole time? Had he been watching her grieve, knowing that she thought he was gone forever? The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture was still incomplete. How had Vanessa become involved in this? What had she been hiding? And most importantly, where was Adrian? Was he really alive, or had this woman woven a web of lies to cover up a far darker truth? But there was something else, something Victoria didn't expect. The child. Vanessa's child. His last name. It matched Adrian's. Victoria's heart skipped a beat as the realization hit her. Could it be? Was the child really her grandson? Was this the child Adrian had left behind? The questions were piling up, and Victoria had no answers. She could feel the truth slipping further away, taunting her with every revelation. And just when she thought she was getting closer to the truth, Vanessa dropped another bombshell. "But the most shocking twist is still ahead," Vanessa whispered, her voice barely audible, as though afraid of what she was about to reveal. "Because I wasn't just a waitress. I was part of something bigger. Something connected to your son in a way no one ever expected." Victoria's breath caught in her throat. What could be more shocking than what she had already heard? What was Vanessa hiding now? The tension in the room was unbearable, and Victoria knew that the answers she sought would either destroy her or set her free. But one thing was certain. The woman standing before her had the key to unraveling the mystery of Adrian's disappearance, and Victoria was about to get the answers she had been searching for all these years. As Victoria sat across from Vanessa, the weight of the words still hung in the air like an unbearable fog. Vanessa had told her so much. Too much, perhaps. And yet, the truth seemed further out of reach than ever before. She had learned that Adrian wasn't gone, that he had faked his death for his own protection, and that this woman, the one who had once served her at the cafe, held the key to unraveling everything. But the final revelation, the one Vanessa had yet to fully disclose, was the one that would shatter everything Victoria thought she knew about her son, her family, and herself. Vanessa's hands trembled as she shifted the child in her arms, and for a moment, the room was thick with tension. She had been holding something back, something so earth-shattering that it seemed too impossible to believe. Slowly, she looked up at Victoria, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and resignation. "Victoria," Vanessa whispered, her voice shaking. "The child I'm holding. He's not just Adrian's child. He's your grandson." The words hit Victoria like a blow to the chest. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Her mind raced, her heart pounding so violently in her chest that it felt as though the world around her was closing in. Her grandson? How could this be? Adrian had been gone. There was no way. The pieces weren't adding up, and yet, as Vanessa spoke, something in Victoria's heart began to stir. The child's resemblance to Adrian, it wasn't just a coincidence. It couldn't be. Vanessa's face softened, and she continued. "Adrian didn't just disappear, Victoria. He left because he had to protect his son, your grandson. And when he died, he didn't want you to know. He didn't want you to be a part of this dangerous world. So he kept it from you. He kept you safe from the truth." Victoria's mind swirled with disbelief. The grief she had carried for so long, the pain of losing her son, the unanswered questions. It all seemed so distant now. The truth was like a cruel puzzle, one that was slowly coming together piece by piece. Adrian, her son, was alive. But why hadn't he returned? Why had he stayed away, leaving her to mourn him for years? And why had Vanessa, the waitress, kept this secret for so long? As the weight of the revelation settled over her, Victoria felt an overwhelming surge of emotions. Shock, anger, confusion, but also something else, something deeper. The child, her grandson, was standing right in front of her, yet it felt like she had missed out on so much. "How long have you known?" Victoria finally managed to ask, her voice trembling with both fear and hope. "I've known for years," Vanessa replied, her voice barely a whisper. "Since the day Adrian and we found out. He wanted to tell you, Victoria. He wanted you to know about his son, but there was never a good time. And then, when the threats became real, he had to vanish. For your safety, for his son's safety." Victoria closed her eyes, feeling a deep ache in her chest. The son she had lost, the son she thought had been taken from her, had not only been alive but had been part of a life she had never been a part of. He had a child who was now sitting right in front of her, looking at her with wide eyes, not fully understanding the magnitude of the moment. The room felt like it was closing in on her, the walls pressing in with the weight of what Vanessa was saying. But this wasn't the end of the story. There was more to it, more that Victoria needed to understand. The truth was still unfolding, and the revelations were only just beginning. As the tension in the room reached its peak, Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes locking with Victoria's. "There's something else, Victoria. The truth about Adrian's death. It wasn't an accident. Someone made sure he was gone." The words cut through the silence like a knife. Victoria's breath caught in her throat, and her pulse quickened. "What do you mean? Who?" she demanded, her voice rising. Vanessa hesitated before continuing. "I don't know all the details, but Adrian was trying to expose something. There were people in his life, people who would do anything to protect their secrets, and when they found out he was getting too close, they took matters into their own hands." Victoria could feel the anger rising inside her. Her son, her Adrian, had been murdered, and she had been left in the dark. All these years, she had been mourning the death of a man who had been betrayed. And now, she was standing in front of a child who was his legacy. A legacy that had been hidden from her for far too long. "Who are these people?" Victoria demanded, her voice raw with emotion. "Where is Adrian? Where is my son?" Vanessa shook her head. "I don't know, but I know he didn't want you to suffer. He didn't want you to carry the pain of his death. So, he faked it. And now, it's time to find the answers." The room was thick with silence as the gravity of Vanessa's words sank in. The child in her arms, Victoria's grandson, was the only tangible link to Adrian's hidden life. And now, Victoria was standing at the precipice of a revelation that could change everything. But there was still so much unknown, so much left to uncover. Who had killed Adrian? And why had he been forced to disappear in the first place? The truth was unraveling, but it was only the beginning. As the pieces of the puzzle came together, the tension in the room only grew. The questions kept piling up, and Victoria knew that the answers were just out of reach. But she was closer than ever to finding the truth that had eluded her for so many years. Victoria's world had crumbled piece by piece as she had slowly come to understand the truth. Her son, Adrian, the boy she thought she had lost forever, had never truly gone. He had been hidden away, not by choice, but by necessity. For years, she had mourned him, carrying the unbearable weight of a mother's grief. But now, standing in the wake of the revelation, she realized that her son had left behind something she never could have anticipated. His child. Her grandson. The child, the one she had never known existed, stood before her, looking up at her with wide, innocent eyes. She had thought the pain of losing Adrian would be the hardest thing she would ever have to face. But now, as she looked into the eyes of the child who carried his blood, the sorrow she had held for so long began to shift. It was no longer just pain. It was the beginning of something new, something she had never expected to find. For years, Victoria had lived in the shadow of her grief, clinging to the memory of Adrian, her only son. The cold gravestone marking his resting place had been the only place she could feel close to him, the only place where she could pretend he was still with her, still alive in some small way. But now, here, standing before her, was this boy, this living connection to the past, who carried her son's face, his smile, and perhaps, in the future, even his spirit. The child's existence was a gift, a part of Adrian's legacy, something that connected her to him in a way that nothing else ever could. As Victoria knelt down, her heart pounding with emotion, she reached out to him, her hands trembling. For a moment, she didn't know what to say, what to do. All she had ever wanted was to be a mother, to have her son by her side, and now, standing before her, was the embodiment of everything she had lost, yet everything she had hoped for. She felt the fullness of the moment, as if the universe itself had just given her a second chance. She had always imagined that if Adrian were alive, he would return to her to explain, to say that he had been wrong to leave. She had imagined the reunion, how they would pick up the pieces of their relationship, how they would make amends for the years of separation. But now this boy, her grandson, was all she had left of him. And even though he was a living reminder of her son's absence, he was also the living proof that Adrian's love had not been in vain, that a piece of him was still here in the world, and perhaps in a way he had been watching over her all along. "Come here, my dear," Victoria whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The child, hesitant at first, took a step forward, and placed his small hand in hers. The touch was electric, sending waves of warmth and grief crashing through her. It felt like a moment she had waited for her whole life, and yet it was bittersweet, laced with the sorrow of all the years she had spent mourning Adrian. As she held him in her arms for the first time, Victoria felt a surge of love she had never expected to feel again. The love she had given to Adrian, the love she had lost, now found a new vessel in this boy, this child who was her grandson. But even in this moment of joy, there was a bittersweet edge to it. Adrian was gone, and nothing could bring him back. The pain of losing him would never fully disappear, but this child, her grandson, was a reminder of what he had left behind. He was a link to the past, to a love that would never fade, and to a future that was still uncertain. The loss of Adrian could never be undone, but in this boy there was a possibility for healing, for new beginnings, and for something precious that Victoria had never expected to find. Victoria held the child tightly, feeling the gentle rise and fall of his chest, the softness of his small body. It was as if the years of longing, the years of unanswered questions, had finally found some form of resolution. The grief was still there, gnawing at the edges of her heart, but it was now softened by the presence of this child, this piece of Adrian that she could hold close. In his eyes, she could see the past and the future intertwining, and she could feel a deep connection to her son that she had never thought possible. Days later, Victoria stood alone at Adrian's grave, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. She had come here to mourn, to say goodbye, but now it felt different. The grief was still present, but it was no longer the only thing she carried. As she looked down at the cold stone marking her son's resting place, she could feel his presence with her, not in the way she had once imagined, but in the form of the child she now held dear. The grave, which had once been the symbol of her loss, now felt like a symbol of a new chapter, a new beginning. She had always imagined that she would be the one to care for Adrian, to guide him through life, but now, in the wake of this shocking revelation, she realized that her journey was not over. It had only just begun. She wasn't alone. She had a family again, a legacy to protect. As she stood there, a gentle breeze lifting her hair, Victoria could feel a sense of peace settling over her. The pain of the past would never fully leave her, but she no longer carried it alone. She had the child, and with him, the possibility of healing and redemption. Victoria closed her eyes and whispered, "I'll take care of him, Adrian, I promise." She placed a single flower on the grave, the wind rustling the leaves around her as if to carry her words to her son, wherever he was. She knew Adrian couldn't hear her, but it didn't matter. She had made a promise that now stretched beyond the grave. As she turned away from the grave, a sense of closure began to wash over her. It wasn't the kind of closure she had once hoped for, the kind that came with answers and finality, but it was the kind of closure that came with understanding, with the acceptance that life, no matter how tragic, could still hold unexpected gifts. Her son might have been lost, but his legacy, his family, would live on through her. The twist of fate had led her to this moment, and she would make sure that it was one worth living. Victoria's steps were lighter now as she walked away from the grave, her heart still heavy but filled with a renewed sense of purpose. The story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. And as she looked down at her grandson, holding his hand in hers, she knew that she would never let him go. Adrian might have been lost, but his legacy, his family, would never fade. Through her grandson, Adrian's memory would live on, and with that, she would carry his spirit forward. Life, it seemed, was full of unexpected twists, but perhaps that was where its beauty lay, in the unknown, in the way even the darkest moments could give birth to something new, something worth holding on to. Now, as you watch Victoria hold her grandson in her arms, a tearful yet hopeful moment of realization, think about this. What would you do if you were in her shoes? After all these years of heartache, of believing that your only child was gone, how would you feel in that moment? Would you be able to forgive the past, to understand the choices made, and embrace a future that you never imagined possible? Or would the weight of the years of grief, the unanswered questions, and the trauma of losing someone so dear to you be too much to bear? Would you be able to move past the pain, or would the loss of Adrian be too great to ever truly heal from? Imagine holding a child in your arms who carries the very blood of someone you've lost, someone you thought you could never see again. A child who represents not just the loss but also the chance for a second chance, a legacy you never knew existed. Could you face the truth of what has been hidden from you all these years? And could you embrace that truth with open arms, no matter how painful or confusing it might be? What would you do? Would you choose to fight for the answers, for the truth that's been kept from you? Or would you run away from it all, too overwhelmed by the past to move forward? This story is more than just about Victoria's journey. It's about all of us, about how we handle grief, how we process the unthinkable, and how we heal if we ever truly can. Share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to hear from you. This story, these emotions, and the decisions that Victoria has had to make are not unique to her. Many of us have faced challenges, moments where we've had to decide how to move forward in the face of tragedy or unexpected revelations. Your voice matters, and your experience can help others who may be going through something similar. What did this story make you think about your own life? About your relationships, your loved ones, and your own journey with loss and healing? How would you handle it if the truth came crashing in like it did for Victoria? What would your first steps be? Would you seek forgiveness, or would you try to rebuild the broken pieces of your own family? Take a moment to reflect and then share your thoughts with us in the comments below. It's a place where we can connect, where we can understand one another and learn from each other's journeys. Your perspective is valuable and it adds so much to this community. We all have our own stories, but together we can find comfort, strength, and even answers in one another's experiences. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for watching, for being here with us, and for sharing your thoughts. It means so much to all of us. We look forward to reading your thoughts and continuing this conversation together. And remember, this isn't just Victoria's story. It's a story about us all and how we find our way through life's most difficult moments.